Oh, we live. So, welcome back to the live stream. Now I know this is like during the day, and I really wanted to do this sucker at the middle of the night, but due to my lack of sleep, we're gonna try only probably like maybe this one time, probably like doing it this during the day. So we're going to be doing some more Warhammer lore, and this is gonna be about Neferata. Yeah, Neferata. I guess the first vampire. So yeah, let's get to it.
Hey everyone, before we
Oh, and by the way, I am going to leave the link down below to the guy who made this wonderful video.
get started with this video, I just needed to make a few quick announcements. First, I want to give a huge shout out to Izzy from the Total War Warhammer forums. He's been an absolute great help to me with this video, helping me look up all of the massive amounts of lore for Neferata, and as I'm going to talk about in a moment, figuring out the best storyline. If you are on the Total War Warhammer forums, please go shoot him a private message, giving him a thanks for all the hard work.
We love Warhammer!
Out for like another 4 months if it hadn't been for his help. I mean, he was just a massive, massive help, and I am very, very appreciative for the work he did. The last point that I need to make real quick before you watch this is that, as I kind of mentioned, Neferata's story has some conflicts depending on various sources. The Neferata from prior to 7th edition, the Neferata from the 7th and 8th edition books, the Neferata from her own book, and the Neferata from the End Times aren't exactly the same and have some different stories, such as in the End Times it's mentioned that Karakburn, or the Silver Pinnacle, was conquered by greenskins before she took it, but that conflicts with her own personal story in which she actually took it from the dwarves. So what we decided to do was go through, find the best version of the story, the most entertaining version, and what I would suspect to be the most accurate version, especially for a game coming up for like Total War Warhammer. So what you would expect to see is her actual background if you were to meet her and get like a little information tab. This video is going to cover a lot of information. I hope you enjoyed it. It's my longest yet. As I'll kind of talk about at the end of the video, the videos after this probably won't be nearly this long for a little while. So I hope you enjoy this.
Wait. Just gonna skip ahead a little bit more. Let's just see.
Her name is Neferata.
There we go.
Which means she who is beautiful in death. And this is the story of the first of all vampires. Neferata was born to the king of ancient Lamia, Lamasheptra. As was custom in Nehekhara, she was given over to the mortuary cult and became a priestess, though she remained royalty and interested in her father's pursuits. Lamasheptra was a rather forward-thinking man, and invested nearly all of Lamia's assets into early black powder invented by Cathay. His plan was well timed, as civil war erupted across Nehekhara, for the priest kings had risen up to strike down Nagash once and for all. For a time Lamasheptra held no loyalty, but eventually decided to side with the kings of Nehekhara. His new black powder weapons proved crucial against the usurper, and Nagash was defeated. Lamasheptra died soon after Nagash was cast down, and Neferata ascended to the throne. She took a husband named Vashanesh, who left to reforge the trade agreements with Cathay, while her brother Lamashazar went to help with the final hunt for Nagash's minion. Thus was Neferata the sole ruler of Lamia, and she found the position quite to her liking. After managing the city for a number of years, Neferata was reluctant to give up her power when her brother finally returned. She had no desire to return to the role of just a high priestess and a potential mother of heirs. It was around this time that she made a decision which would alter the course of the world. While the other rulers of Nehekhara were doing their best to destroy everything within Nagash's Black Pyramid, Neferata stole into its darkness with a different objective in mind. Through unrecorded methods, she managed to discover a hidden sanctum and found one of the dangerous 9 books of Nagash. She took the artifact and fled back to Lamia, hoping to discover the secret to immortality within its flesh-bound pages. She spent weeks trying to pry the secrets from the most potent of Nagash's books. Using the abilities she had learned during her reign as High Priestess, Neferata began to master the dark arts within the tome. Using every method, the Queen of Lamia finally managed to recreate Nagash's elixir of eternal life.
Mm.
However, due to not having skills or knowledge on par with the great necromancer, Neferata's version was flawed. Although she attained eternal life in youth, the imperfection within her creation caused her to need the blood of the still living to sustain her body. Thus was the first of the vampires born. Neferata found her body increase terrifyingly in strength and speed, able to perform feats no mere human could hope to match. During this time, her rule was solidified as her brother, Lamashazar, attempted to assassinate her, only to discover, to his horror, that she could not be killed so easily by poison or blade. Lamashazar died shortly thereafter from a servant of the Vampire Queen, leaving the High Priestess in complete control of Lamia. She desired a court similar to her in form, so her next act was to craft the elixir for the elite of her city. This is how the likes of Usharin, Wazoran, and 9 other humans joined the ranks of the damned. The last to be turned was the warrior Abarash, who Neferata tricked into drinking the elixir, as she knew he would never consent to it willingly. Thus was the first coven of vampires formed under the Queen of Lamia. Despite not aging and the occasional act of glutting themselves on some poor victim, Neferata ensured that the vampires of Lamia stayed secret. She had learned from the mistakes of Nagash, and wanted to avoid exposing the newly forged undead to their enemies. Neferata learned many things about her new powers, including discovering the fabled blood kiss. This process is a unique experience to each vampire, whereby they can turn another living mortal into a vampire, sharing the original undead's blood. Thus were the earliest Lamian handmaids born, such as Imentet and Naima. However, the vampires' attempt at secrecy was not a complete success. One lord of Nehekhara knew something was amiss, and rode to Lamia to confirm her suspicions. High Queen Khalida of Lybaris, cousin of the Vampire Queen, arrived in the isolated city, and it did not take long for her to realize something was terribly wrong. Neferata actually did love her cousin, but when attempting to coerce Khalida into joining the undead, the Queen of Lybaris responded by demanding a duel. Neferata was disappointed by this turn of events, but agreed and fought her dear cousin. Although Khalida was exceptionally skilled, she was a mere human and had no hope of defeating the first vampire. As was demanded by such a battle, Neferata cut down Khalida, but before her cousin bled out, the vampiress gave the Queen of Lybaris the blood kiss, so that she would join the elite of Lamia in undeath. Khalida had no desire for such a dark fate, and called out to the Asp goddess for deliverance, and so her prayer was answered, as all of her blood turned to deadly poison. So did High Queen Khalida die, and Neferata mourned the stubbornness of her cousin. While her brothers and sisters in undeath grew accustomed to their new lives, Neferata took on a strange side project. Believing herself to have been abandoned by her husband who still dwelt in Cathay, she desired a new partner, and destiny provided her with an ample opportunity. The Queen of Raestra, another city in Nehekhara, was pregnant with child, but the priest warned her that the wind of death whispered claim to this unborn prince. Fearing for her son's life, Raestra went to the High Priestess of Lamia for aid from the gods, and Neferata saw in this situation a potential for her own gain. The Queen of Vampires offered the neighboring queen some potions and augments, but told her that when the child was born, he would have to be raised by Neferata. Once he was of age, the prince would be returned to take the throne of Raestra. The Queen of Lamia had secretly infused a distilled elixir of life into the potion she gave the worried mother, and decided she would raise this child to become her champion, her lover. Thus was Alcatazar brought into the world, and he was raised and trained in war, diplomacy, and educated by the eternal Neferata. All she needed was time to raise him into the greatest of men and turn him, which meant she needed the dark truth of Lamia to remain a secret. However, despite the efforts of the first vampire, eventually the aristocracy of Lamia began to grow in their excess, and desired even greater power. Two of their number, Wazoran and Usharan, above all others desired to increase their might, and they searched for ways to do so. When they discovered that Nagash had not only survived the war with the Priest Kings, but was rebuilding his power in Cripple Peak, their restlessness could be contained no longer. They sent messengers to contact Nagash, much to the wrath of Neferata when she discovered this treachery. There was no stopping what had been done, however, and to the ill fortune of the undead, the servants of the Priest Kings intercepted and captured these agents. Through them, the kings discovered not only had Nagash survived, but Lamia was in league with him. As Nehekara roused to the true nature of Neferata, another disaster struck against the Queen of the Damned. Alcadizar discovered the truth of the ancient city, and much like the noble Abarash, had no desire to be a part of it. Unlike the great warrior, though, he successfully escaped the city while Neferata attempted to repair the damage done by Wazoran, and made his way back to Riestra. Destiny ensured that Neferata kept her promise to the queen of that city, and Alcadizar returned to his home city where he became king. It was with quite some shock that when the 7 priest kings united to deal with the city of the damned, the queen of Lamia saw King Alcadizar riding against her. She led the vampires in a great battle at the Sphinx Gate, where the vampires slaughtered hundreds of the Royal Legion soldiers, and raising their corpses to attack former allies. Yet the priest kings had magic of their own, and an army that numbered in the tens of thousands. Eventually, the vampires were defeated, and Lamia's population was enslaved, along with the pyramids shattered. Many of the undead lords were put to final rest, even Neferata barely escaping with her life. Unlike most of her kind, Neferata did not flee north to the sinister fortress of Nagashizar, but instead went east with Naima, likely by sea or the Silver Road, and eventually reaching Cathay. It is at least possible that at some time during this trip she encountered her now estranged husband, but no such encounter is recorded, and the details, if any, are unknown. She resided in the far country for a time, before leaving under mysterious circumstances, though it is suggested to have been a difficult exodus. Skirting the borders of her former neighbors, she was navigating the deserts of Araby when she was ambushed by Wazoran and Usharan. Their poor efforts brought news of Nagash's return to her, and though she had not yet met him, she knew the danger of the rising threat. Gathering the desert tribes to attack the city of Bel Aliad was her only option. From there, she could conquer or rally all of Araby to face the looming monster who desired to control all things in death. But fate had decided to play Neferata a fool, and the siege did not go well for her when it turned into an assault. With her handmaidens, she pressed hard into the city, but a momentary distraction in the form of a particularly troublesome warrior proved her undoing. As she turned to face this new threat, Abarash's lance thundered into her chest, and she collapsed into stagnant dreams. The father of the Blood Dragon bloodline had mixed feelings towards the Vampire Queen, but knew that Nagash demanded that she be brought before him. In a confused state of pity, longing, and bitterness, he had struck down his queen, and stashed her body away so she wouldn't fall into the great necromancer's hands. Later regaining her senses, Neferata found herself immobilized by a shard of Abarash's lance, which remained in her heart, and was entombed in a decidedly plain sarcophagus. The insult did not impede her greatly, and she regained her faculties along with 2 new followers after several months. It was not long until Bel Aliad was attacked again, but this time by Archon the Black. But instead of death, he brought news to the Vampire Queen. Nagash, the great necromancer, was dead, struck down by Alcaldizar himself when mysteriously freed from captivity and armed. The conqueror had disappeared just as strangely as he had arrived. But one problem so often replaces another, and this was no break in tradition. Archon was at war with all of Araby. not due to any latent desires for freedom and glory, but survival. Khemri had died under Nagash's magics, but it had also awoken something terrible. The Priest Kings had fallen, and the Tomb Kings had risen in their place. Setra the Imperishable himself would soon return to stalk the moaning winds, but so had an old enemy of Neferata's, and all born of Nagash's power were in great peril. As Araby reeled under Archon's assault, Neferata led her handmaidens away from the largely distasteful fighting in search of a new home. They soon arrived in the so-called Corsair city of Lashik, and followed a frightened barbarian woman from the far north named Ilsa. Eventually, they took ship to the island of Sartosa, known by that name even then. Ilsa's fate is not recorded, but Neferata was not known to cast useful tools aside in those days. Given her exotic barbarian heritage and knowledge of the Tilean language, it is likely that Ilsa was eventually granted the Blood Kiss and took her place among the new Deathless Court, with many others of such interesting origin. The island of Sartosa was a strange place, even hundreds of years before the founding of the empire. Plagued by Drukai and Arabian raiders, Neferata saw that there were gains to be made among these pirates by ending at least some of these problems. First, she bought off the Dark Elves by raiding a few isolated fishing villages for slaves, and then striking a bargain with an allied Drukai named Megara to plunder the nearby mainland. That land would not become the empire for several centuries, and the Norscan tribes inhabiting this section of the Old World had already grown distant from the empire's ancestors. Man's disunity was even greater than it would be in the difficult times after Sigmar, and they proved easy pickings for Megara and her lithe underlings. She then followed up by manipulating the political structure of Sartosa, and before long, Neferata found herself with much gold at her disposal, a new handmaiden of considerable prowess, and a seat on the Sartosian Senate for another of her daughter's husbands. But she was also delivered a warning. Her Dark Elf allies warned her that a fleet was assembling at the port of Xandri, and their objective was rumored to be a pale woman recently arrived on the pirate isle. But no matter how haunting the words of Megara were, Neferata simply did not believe that this fleet would ever set sail. Her faith was quite mistaken. When they eventually came, the fleet was even larger than Megara had warned. Almost from the moment that they approached the city, Neferata knew that her cause was lost. As Sartosa burned, Neferata fought her way through the spears, arrows, and sickle swords of the skeletal legions. The seaborne catapults of the Tomb Fleet brought hovel, temple, and palace alike crashing down, the living defenders all but overrun. History records the fleet as led by Setra himself, but it was not the Imperishable that she who is beautiful in death met that day. Atop an aqueduct, as she screamed at her servants to fall beneath the sight of an archer line, a staff struck the queen in her silk-clad belly. High Queen Khalida had found her, and the animated warriors of Khemri circled like vultures when Neferata was blasted into the street below. Their reunion carried an exchange of blame with regards to the fall of Lamia, but the combat following was swift. Neferata took a deep wound to her breast, which narrowly missed her heart, but she savaged Khalida with her claws in return, tearing through paper-thin flesh and severing the serving queen's spine. The Queen of Libarus fell defeated, but not yet destroyed. Neferata ran, and swore that she would never flee her beloved cousin's presence again. It is not known where Neferata and her handmaidens escaped to in the Old World. What would become Tilia seems likely, and a journey under the vaults and then across the Badlands is possible. For the world next heard of the Lamians as they wandered south through the lower World's Edge mountain. Little could be found to the north in this age, save tribes of barbarians, beastmen, and greenskins. The mighty nations of later years were still centuries away from conception, and Neferata has a great love of civilization and vice. Dressed in furs, and with blood hunger creeping upon them, the Lamians may have been journeying south in an attempt to reach Araby once again, despite the dangers that such a return would have posed. But at some point, 800 years before Sigmar unified the 12 realms of men and forged his empire at Blackfire Pass, the sun turned black, and the wandering queen began to hear a cruel voice in her mind. It drew her off course, to a place raised in imitation of her beloved home, and ruled by an old servant of hers, the city of Morkane. But Ushoran saw Neferata as his monarch no longer. He had declared himself king, hetman, in the tongue of his new people, and had built for himself an extensive power base among the newly civilized populace, turning the highest to vampirism and keeping their inferiors below his heel, though they were forbidden from actively assailing the populace. Neferata did not intend to suffer this insult, but she had more important things to deal with. By offering herself in service to her former minister, she was able to slide gracefully into Strigoi society. The first vampire's handmaidens took many Strigoi husbands, allowing the natives of Morkane to believe it their choice, for the Lamians had always prided themselves on their ability to whisper commands into vulnerable lovers' ears and learn anything they desired.
Vulnerable.
The mortuary cult from long-dead Nehekara was refounded, the priestesses being granted the blood kiss by Neferata, and many of the acolytes being made into necrarchs, which were the Get of Wazoran, the other elder vampire, who was searching for many of the answers that Neferata herself sought, and a dwarven diplomat from the north was engaged in many conversations within this city. Eventually, after many assassinations, blood kisses, persuasions, and duels, Neferata set out to discover the power that called to her. The nature and the source of her visions were becoming clearer, but her own knowledge was not yet sufficient to master them. The time had now come to enter a place that she had long fought to avoid. The party that she led, Lila, Rasha, and the necromancer Morath, found themselves scaling Cripple Peak itself, fighting off packs of ghouls outside and the Skaven inside. Guided by spells to Nagash's throne room, they found what Neferata sought. As Morath gathered the seemingly unremarkable, if rotten and dust-covered pages, scattered here and there, Lila and Rasha held hordes of clan rats at bay. They realized that the room was surrounded. But though the warpstone-infused rock was draining the life from Morath, he still had enough strength to raise the skeleton warriors discarded on the floor. The Skaven that had fought the undead of Nagash so long ago had passed centuries ago, but something in these ratmen remembered what it was they were facing, and enough of them fled shrieking into the darkness to allow the expedition to escape. They returned to Morkane quietly confident, but Ushoran finally managed to catch Neferata off balance. She, beaten to her knees, sworn her fealty in exchange for her life, and he sent her to faraway Kadak Burn to make amends with the Dawi there. That he had not simply killed her proved to be a great mistake. Neferata left with all of her servants and a force of Strigoi provided by Ushoran. She arrived in Kadak Burn, and over the course of a long war eradicated the dwarves and killed all those unfaithful to her. She conquered the highest peak in the World's Edge Mountains, and began the transformation of the Silver Pinnacle into a beautiful realm of undeath. Nearly 3 centuries later, Archon the Black visited the Silver Pinnacle to demand the Vampire Queen's allegiance in the newly returned Nagash's name. She gave him a mysterious large shaking box containing a withered form of an old underling of hers. Archon left with this gift, but it is unclear what he did with it. Archon returned to fight alongside Nagash at the Battle of the River Reich against Sigmar, but ultimately fled when the great necromancer was struck down by the first emperor. With the defeat of Nagash, the retreat of Archon back to Nehekara, and the binding of Krell, Neferata was the only remaining greater power of the undead. Thus did the old world become hers, as her webs slowly encompassed every growing nation. Now that we've got the history of Neferata out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to her skills. Neferata is the first of the vampires, and has mastered many of their sinister arts no other can hope to match. Her ultimate strength is her gift at beguiling even the strongest-willed men, enthralling them with a single gaze. Despite the fact her appearance up close is cruel and lacking of kindness, there are few, even among the elder races, that aren't stricken by her beauty. Truly, her allure is one of the greatest in the world, matched only by the lithe demons of Slaanesh, which are desire given physical form. Despite her enchanting gaze, Neferata isn't the strongest wizard among the undead aristocracy. Although more powerful than most of her kind in dark magic, she would not be able to stand up to the likes of elven archmages and Balthazar Gelt. However, rather uniquely among her kind, Neferata actually specializes in magic meant to maim and kill enemies, rather than raising the dead. Although she could be magically overwhelmed by the likes of Manfred von Karstein or Archon the Black, Neferata's true strength is in closer quarters. When it comes to the art of close combat, virtually no creature is fast enough to match the first vampire. She is one of the quickest warriors in the world, able to unleash a flurry of blows in the blink of an eye. She is the fastest of the vampires, even faster than all but the greatest elven warriors. On top of her speed, Neferata is also graceful, able to make battle look like a seductive dance as she slits throats with effortless flicks of her wrists. Only the greater demons of Slaanesh, his keepers of secrets, can hope to match the elegance of Neferata.
So let me pay. So hold on, I have to pause that for a quick second. So, she can fight greater demons and is really good at close quarter combats, but anything else besides that, it seems like she's poopy. So, okay.
When performing the Dance of Death. Even then, there is a way for Neferata to move faster. Like most, if not all vampires, she has the ability to transform into an animal. The former Queen of Lamia takes on the form of a panther the color of midnight, her razor-sharp claws easily capable of tearing out men's throats in a blur. Far too many have thought themselves safe when they check her dagger and magic, only to be pounced upon by a predator that could rend through steel. While swifter than any of her vile kind, Neferata's strength is nothing unexpected for a vampire. That being said, she is still more than capable of bodily hurling the plate-armored knights of the Empire. She isn't in league with the likes of Krell or Abarash in terms of strength, but only a fool would trust their armor to save them from her wrath. However, strength can be overrated. Often, problems can be solved with a much quieter approach, and Neferata is the master of such tactics. Thanks to the massive Lamian sisterhood, the Vampire Queen maintains ears in nearly every nation in the entire world. Each vampiress is trained to use the art of seduction, beguiling spells, and manipulation to learn every safeguarded secret in the world. Even the realms of the elves and dwarves are not immune to this. She is without a doubt the most manipulative of the vampires, her network of information only rivaled by Morathi's Sorceress Coven and the information-consuming demons of Tzeentch. Of course, the most important aspect of Neferata is her bloodline. Of all of the bloodline founders, none have retained control of their Git like Neferata. She has easily the largest family of vampires, as Lamians maintain agents in every city of note, some cities like Altdorf even having multiple covens. To maintain such a network requires an absolutely massive amount of vampires, far greater than the numbers any of the other bloodlines could hope to achieve. Von Karsteins bicker too much, Necrarchs are too reclusive, Strigoi are all bloodthirsty animals, and blood dragons are too martial to maintain great numbers for long. Truly, the Lamians are the greatest of the Vampire Count bloodline. With her skills taken care of, let's go ahead and move on to her most famous battle, the Siege of the Silver Pinnacle. Neferata began her assault on the Silver Pinnacle, also known as Karakbern, by bringing news to the king during a public audience of his son's death. She witnessed the entry of Usharin's name into the Book of Grudges for that hold,
and then she launched herself at the Dwarf King. Though she killed a number of the Dawi with her speed, strength, and talents, his death was not her objective. She needed him to retreat, and thus gain time to deal with those non-monstrous Strigoi accompanying her, whom she did not trust, as well as a renegade male Lamian named Khalid, who had thrown his lot in with them. She retreated to open the gates and held the dwarves at bay, catching crossbow bolts with little effort for just long enough to allow her forces and handmaidens to break cover and enter the fortress. Eventually, the Dawi were pushed back into the lower tunnels and halls. Over several weeks and months, Neferata was able to overcome the formidable defenses of the Karak, but eventually, she found a gate which
Excuse me! Use anchor instead!
Wait, what? Oh. Ad break!
she could not pass. Unwilling to simply wait them out, since she suspected that they could remain supplied and summon reinforcements, Neferata began to search for another entrance. Eventually, she found another entrance in a frozen river cave's mouth, which supplied the great forges and smelters of the mining settlement. At the lake forming the river's mouth, she was ambushed by a small group of handgun-armed rangers who had been hiding beneath the skins of the direwolves that prowled the area. However, she quickly overcame them and their silver bullets by simply smashing the ice which they stood upon, sending the dwarves to a cold, icy death. With the way now clear, she and her handmaids swam into the Underdeep. After making a point of slaughtering the warriors of various ranks they found, and a few unfortunate miners, the vampires were able to stalk their way through the tunnels, vents, and shafts into the ancestral tombs. Here, Neferata was able to raise the long-dead forebears of the defenders for just long enough to open the gates which had so hindered her allies, and thus unleash the doom of the dwarves. With their gates now open, the Dawi were pushed back into their last redoubt. In true dwarvish fashion, they continued to fight against the numberless undead, even to the extent that they checked them. Booming cannons obliterated skeletons into flying splinters, runic axes cut down the remaining Strigoi, and the king of Karakburn crushed foe after foe. But when Morath, the still mortal disciple of Wazoran, raised the freshly fallen dwarves to bear against their former comrades, the Dawi could take no more, and retreated into their final tunnel. Neferata grew tired of this fighting, and offered the Dwarf King a choice: surrender and leave alive with his people, or die. The dwarves retreated to consider their options. However, as she was waiting for their decision, the vampire queen heard a sudden great number of screams break out from within the nearby temple of Balaya. Neferata raced inside to be confronted with a visage of slaughter. Khalid, the male Lamian, had forsaken Neferata's command and had murdered every single dwarven citizen,
Damn.
with some of the corpses being noted as impossibly small. Enraged at this betrayal and her bargaining chip gone, Neferata launched herself at this Lamian, and their fight began. However, they paused rather quickly into the fight when a great angry moaning broke out from the last tunnel. The dwarves, formerly armored from head to foot as they often are, had cast aside all but their sandals, trousers, and weapons, and they were coming. All of those dwarves had taken an oath to protect their family, their loved ones, and they had failed. Due to this great shame, they all decided to become slayers, and as they came out of the final tunnel to face the vampires, hatred burned in their eyes as they came out to seek either an honorable death or retribution against the undead. With the arrival of the dwarves, a three-way battle erupted in the temple, as the forces of Neferata clashed with the dwarves and the final Strigoi. In the fray, Neferata attempted to apologize to the king. She amended her offer: the dead civilians and an honorable burial, replacing her once breathing bargaining chips. No was her final answer, Labeled an Oathbreaker, she had no choice but to fight the Lord of Karakburn. As she rose from his impaled form, for it had been a simple fight, Khalid the Betrayer launched himself at her. Swinging his Strigoi blade, he met a darting form and screamed. For it was not Neferata who had been cut by his blade, but his beloved sister, a fellow Lamian. She had chosen Neferata's side, and saved the Queen of Mysteries with her own life. Distracted, Khalid was no match for the Queen of Vampires. But he was captured alive. He was sealed away in a box, and after many, many years, was eventually given to Archon the Black as a gift. And thus did Neferata capture the Silver Pinnacle, and the dwarves of Karakburn were no more. Alright, now with that battle of hers out of the way, let's go ahead and go over what makes Neferata Neferata in forms of physical equipment. Neferata actually only keeps 2 weapons on her that are of any note. Both of these weapons are from the Vampire Queen's time as the mortal High Priestess of Death in Lamia, and they are the only artifacts she managed to flee the city's fall with. First is Akhmet Kar, the Dagger of Jet, whose cursed edge screams with the death agonies of innocence. Should a brave champion receive even the slightest of cuts from this black blade, his soul will be partially torn away, forever crippling him, even should he somehow survive the encounter. Second is Aken Seth, the Staff of Pain, whose enchantments add crippling agonies to any sorceries Neferata unleashes. The ancient staff makes the already potent magic of the Vampire Queen more deadly than any can imagine. Although Neferata is deadly with blade and spell, it is her bloodline that provides her true strength. The Handmaidens are infamously beautiful vampires that range from every nation across the world. Each is trained in the art of seduction, manipulation, and extraction. They perform their skills all across the world, able to discover every realm's secrets from loose-lipped pillow talk. 2 example handmaidens would be Imentet and Naima. The one we'll cover is Naima. Naima was a concubine from Cathay that ended up in Lamia near the time that Neferata took over the ancient city. She grew close to the High Priestess, and was one of the first given the blood kiss to serve Neferata for all eternity. Beautiful beyond reason, and exceedingly clever, Naima vanished from Lamia for most of the Vampire Queen's reign, before returning in time to witness Lamia's fall. Despite this unexplained absence, she remained in good graces with the Vampire Queen, and led as one of her greatest lieutenants, even to this day. She was second to enter the Silver Pinnacle after her queen, a position only the truly great and trusted can hope to hold. The last important piece Neferata acquired was after the rise of Nagash during the end times. The great necromancer gifted his 3 mightiest Mortarchs Dread Abyssals. The Dread Abyssals were once the hounds of the Nehekaren underworld before Nagash summoned them. The one gifted to Neferata was Nagadron, the Adamor. This monster was famed for stalking the lowest reaches of the underworld, feasting upon the souls of gluttons. Depending on which myth is observed, Nagadron was either the most patient or the most slothful of the Dread Abyssals, choosing to ambush his prey instead of stalking them. Nagadron, much like those it once chose to feed upon, has no sense of appetite and constantly stuffs itself well beyond the size of its stomach. This has led to the disgusting habit of him vomiting up the half-eaten bodies, some still living, only to devour them again in a renewing cycle of hellish torment. With her equipment out of the way, for those of you that are interested, I'm going to go ahead and go over what happened to Neferata during the end times. She was one of the earliest to suspect that Nagash was going to make his return at long last, for she had heard all sorts of strange things coming around the world. She knew both Manfred and Archon the Black were on the move. However, she knew many things that even they did not. For instance, she knew that the Everqueen's daughter was not in fact the daughter of the Phoenix King, but of Tyrion. and therefore her blood would carry the curse of Anarion, and when Nagash used her blood to come back to full life, he would be corrupted, weakened, and would need to get stronger. So, realizing that she was not in the best of graces with Nagash, and he would most likely kill her as soon as he was raised, she decided to be proactive, and she headed south towards Karak Azul to find something that she had discovered many thousands of years ago. However, on her way there with the full forces of the Silver Pinnacle, she was ambushed in Skull Chasm by a force of orcs and goblins. Surprisingly, she almost lost this fight, as Neferata was in quite a hurry and didn't consider the Greenskins much of a threat, as she had not fought them in many, many years. However, the goblins had decided to perform an ambush tactic as opposed to just fighting fairly, as they usually do. So when Neferata's force went plowing into the main line of orcs, they were suddenly surprised as squigs and even a chimera came rushing out of the tunnels on their flanks and slammed into their armies. However, luckily for Neferata, she wasn't alone in this fight, for none other than Krell came smashing into the greenskin lines with his own army of undead. He had been sent by Nagash to assist Neferata, though for the Vampire Queen it was difficult to tell at first if he was there to kill her or to help her with her quest. However, after the Greenskin army was butchered and routed, and he made no moves to confront her, it was fairly safe to assume, at least for a time, that Nagash had more interest in seeing what she was up to. Thus did this unified army of undead press on toward Karak Azul, until they spun off into a very little-known region that contained a gate of one of the ancestor gods. For when Neferata had been wandering north many, many thousands of years ago, she had discovered this place, for it was the resting place of none other than Valaya, one of the 3 dwarven ancestor gods, who was waiting to be awoken so that she might help the dwarves once more. The undead arrived to capture this place, but they found the dwarves already waiting. The dwarves were led by none other than Thoric Ironbrow, the greatest rune lord of Karak Azul, and one of the mightiest of dwarf kind. He had discovered the gate very shortly before Neferata arrived, and was attempting to open it, for if he could open it, he could unleash Valaya once more, and the dwarves could possibly survive what was coming. However, Neferata had no intention of allowing the dwarves to accomplish this goal. As the vampire counts engaged the dwarven army, things grew into a titanic battle in the underground. Eventually, the dwarves received reinforcements from King Cazador of Karak Azul himself. But then there was also a force of greenskins that got involved in the force, and truly things got chaotic. In the end, however, the vampire counts won. Krell himself cut down King Cazador, and Neferata managed to put a wound of great significance on Thoric Ironbrow, but before she could kill him, he slammed his rune hammer onto his anvil with everything that he had, obliterating the Anvil of Doom and killing himself in the process. But he also managed to almost completely shatter the undead army, allowing most of the dwarves of Karak Azul who still lived to escape. This blow nearly killed Neferata herself, and even managed to destroy some of the enchantments that kept Krell moving. Despite this, however, Valaya was captured by the vampire counts, and Neferata gave her to none other than the great necromancer. By giving a dwarf ancestor god to Nagash, Neferata was able to work her way highly back into his esteem after he devoured the energies of the ancestor goddess, renewing much of his old strength. Neferata was named as one of his Mortarchs and given Nagadron, and it was then that Nagash made his final move, as he moved down to attack Nehekara and take the land of the dead for his own. Neferata had a very special mission given to her by Nagash, for he knew that if the Tomb Kings united under Setra, even at his great power and with all of the vampire counts reunited once more along with Archon the Black, he might still lose. So he sent Neferata back to take the city of Lamia, to break the enchantments that sealed it, and to attract the attention of Khalida and the king of Numus, for he knew that some of their grudges ran quite deep, and the Tomb King's ever selfish lot would go to fight her instead of coming to deal with Nagash at Khemri, as Setra had ordered. So, as ordered, Neferata went and took the city of Lamia. And sure enough, High Queen Khalida could not resist this attempt for revenge, and marched her armies, along with some assistance from the king of Numus, to attack the first of the vampires. There was a great battle among the city streets, but the Tomb Kings were ultimately victorious, smashing aside all signs of resistance and pushing towards the center of the city. However, Neferata had planned an escape route, but as she went to retreat from the city through underground labyrinths she had likely used to escape from it before, she found none other than her cousin, Khalida, waiting for her. So the two undead monarchs engaged in battle one final time, but this time it was Khalida who proved superior. Despite being the fastest vampire the world had ever known, Neferata was not prepared for the empowered version of Khalida, who seemed to be embodied the Asp goddess herself. For Khalida was so quick that she was able to cut deep wounds into Neferata without taking a single blow in return, and the Vampire Queen realized quite swiftly that she was losing, and if this fight kept up, she would most surely die. Lucky for the first of the vampires, however, there were far worse things than either form of undead that resided within the city, and as the two queens were battling, one such beast set itself upon them. During the distraction caused by it, Neferata managed to hurl herself into the underground caverns and sealed a great stone door behind her, blocking out her dear cousin. She heard a great scream of wrath and anger, but managed to escape the city with her life one more time. After this, her story is largely unmentioned. She did pull back apparently to the Silver Pinnacle for a time, fighting off demons and other such monsters. But eventually Nagash sent for her, sending Manfred von Karstein to give her orders to return to Slovenia immediately, where he needed someone to watch where the Black Pyramid had been moved to. So, Neferata diligently returned. However, around the time of her arrival was when Nurgle launched his great invasion against Nagash, and Neferata was there for the final battle for the Black Pyramid, when the Skaven managed to infiltrate the Black Pyramid and blow it up from the inside, as Nagash was dealing with the newly risen Isabella von Karstein on the outside. After the destruction of the Black Pyramid, Nagash left Slovenia, and he left Neferata in charge as he took most of the rest of his forces with him. The one thing Neferata asked for in exchange for her service was Khalida. However, this storyline remained largely unresolved in the end times. The only time we see Neferata again after Nagash leaves is at the very end of the accompaniment book for Archaon, or Part 5, in which Neferata shows up in Middenheim at the very, very end of the final battle, and she meets Archon the Black among the debris. The two have a talk showing that they were close lovers, at least in a past life, and Archon the Black reveals that he's going to do something to try and alter the end of the world, but he does tell Neferata that the end is coming and no one can avoid it. So Neferata takes the newly resurrected and finally returned to her sanity Isabella von Karstein, an event we'll cover in another video, back to Slovenia, and here she, Khalida, and Isabella von Karstein defend the last remnants of humanity in that area and wait for the end of the world. And when it comes, just like everyone else in the world, they pass. Well, alright, with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get us to the final portion of the video, which is talking about Neferata's possible appearance in the upcoming Total War Warhammer video game. For those of you who got the Humble Bundle that Creative Assembly did just maybe a week or two, a few weeks ago, the Silver Pinnacle, which is where Neferata is actually on this map. It's in the province or region, if you want to call it, labeled the Northern World's Edge, which is near the top right corner, and you'll notice that there is a road that cuts through the region, and just below that to the left is a little island of mountains. Almost directly to the right of that, actually almost where that little road leads to, that's where the Silver Pinnacle is. So it seems
I don't know what the Silver Pinnacle or road that is, but see, I know, I think this, yeah, he's probably even talking about the PC one, because there hasn't been like any Warhammer games ever since, like, I think the last one was like what, PS3. So I think this one, I think he's talking about, I believe it's PC. I think it's PC. It makes sense.
like there is actually a path leading directly to it, which heavily insinuates she may be in the game. I mean, it would make sense, because she is someone you would likely have to deal with if you were playing Manfred von Karstein. Manfred is actually has a story about when he was rising to power, about when he went to meet Neferata and sort of made an alliance with her to gain the power of the Lamians on his side. Because unlike most of the vampire counts, especially the von Karsteins, Manfred was all about gathering power no matter who it was from or what he had to do to get it. That being said, I imagine if she does show up in the game, she's probably going to be more of a political opponent you have to deal with. I highly doubt you'll actually get to fight her, as she is a very important figure in the lore. That being said, it may be possible. I hope so. I hope if she does fight, she gets her Dread Abyssal Nagadron, because although her fighting on foot is perfectly fine, that model is just so gorgeous. I would love to see it animated in 3D. Other than that, I can't really see any of the other races dealing with her, unless the dwarves have her in a Great Book of Grudges and decide to go back, but that's not even confirmed, depending on which version of lore you look at, which I'm sure I should have had a small little thing at the front of the video talking about the issues with Neferata as far as lore is concerned. But yeah, I hope we get to see her in game. I would love it if she was the way, like, if we had to do...
No, freak that. Freak that. I want this freaking Warhammer to... I mean, there's supposed to be one that's supposed to come out for the P4, but I don't know what's happening there. If either it did or it didn't, or it's still in work. But all of this that we hearing and seeing from, like, Neferata, Manfred, the whole Chaos Gods, all of it, like, it would be nice to actually see. But I know they're gonna be breaking up parts, like, little bit by little bit and stuff. That's why I think that there is probably, I think the rest of the other Warhammer games, I think it was even on PC, I think.
Something to impress her, and that's how we got access to Lamian units like the Coven Throne, which is actually a Lamian model. It's not just this typical vampire count model. But that's pretty much all we've got. So yeah, this was a super long video. There's a lot on this character.
So much.
But that's what happens when you've got pretty much a book series dedicated to a character. I'm sure a video on Sigmar or Nagash would end up just as bad. But the next few videos that will be coming out will be a lot shorter and on some characters or things that are not quite as in.
Alright, so we gonna end that there. So if you like what you saw what you like, you know, please subscribe, share, you know, do all that wonderful stuff. I'm gonna leave the link to this dude's channel, because he's really good when it comes down to all this Warhammer stuff. And I will catch you later.